Hello, everyone. In this session, we'll get started on the geological timescale. In the previous assignment that you did, which was viewing why we were here, primarily looking at life's rocky start and doing those initial readings in the story of Earth, have given you all the raw material that you need to actually begin this project, at least to get a good start on it. Well, first thing we want to think about is how Robert Hazen is going about sort of framing the stages that have happened, the geological changes on Earth and the mineral structure changes on Earth, leading to the subsequent changes or allowability of life and how life flourished and how we know that. That you want to have into your head. Now, one thing he's done is he sort of, and I think neatly, sort of placed things in little packages, little units. So he's put the Earth in divided little color lines, right? So we start with black Earth, then we go into gray Earth, then we get into red Earth, then finally into like green Earth, right? And then snowball Earth. So we have these sort of shifts and changes that are built on colors. But what we want to do is translate that and commingle those with an actual time frame. When exactly do these things happen, and in a way which is actually standardized and recognized in the world around us. The de facto way of recognizing, changes in life on Earth and the history of Earth is utilizing as what is known as a geological timescale, or the GTS for short. So really, what you're going to be doing on this project is first creating sort of a bare bones geological timescale, the outline framing of time, creating your chart, and then putting the little timelines in, so you can box in periods of time. So you're building a skeleton. And then we're going to be throwing in the things that are happening on Earth and happening in life, leading up to the emergence of us humans. And that's your semester-long sort of project. So here's how this can be done. We'll go into more specifics of how to do it, but this is how it can be done. Right. So it can be done either digitally. So you can use, Word, and you can do like portrait. You can turn the thing sideways, and just build a series of pages, that reflect the different sort of time frames on Earth and the color changes that are outlined by Hazen and the things that happen. And you can convert those into a PDF document if you want. Many of you will choose to use PowerPoint. That's fine if you enjoy working with PowerPoint. That is also awesome. And I've actually had students that have annotated them too. Their voice was on there talking about things that are happening too. So you're also welcome to annotate with your voice. But text is good too. So when you think about is when you're building your timeline, you're building this to show somebody something. Let's suppose that there's a friend of yours who hasn't had this class before, and they're kind of, they're novices, and you want to explain something about how life has arisen on Earth, when the Earth started, what changes were made. What could they look over for 15 or 20 minutes and get a good appreciation for it? That's what you're producing. Okay. So think about it. How can you instruct somebody, a little mini representation or summary of a course doing this? So of course we can do this electronically, right? You can also do it on paper at home. I mean, there's nothing to keep you from, doing things paper. And I have some examples below of people who did it on paper. Now, the example that you're going to look at below, which you probably already saw when you got on this page, there's two photographs there. That's the top part's half of it on to the left, and the bottom part's half to the right. A student just took, a set of butcher paper, made it 6 feet long, and they constructed the timeline on that, which is a perfectly wonderful thing to do, right? I've had students that have actually used notebook paper too. That they just had a notebook paper. They went with one series down this way, and then they started with another block, and they had sort of two rows of notebook paper, 3 or 4 feet long, and they put them together. They put them on the floor, and they took photographs of it and uploaded to me, and it's fine too. Now, in the construction of these things, again, the most important thing, not the most, but the first thing you want to do is kind of create the timeline itself, so you know when the time ticks are. But when you actually are constructing it, with visual images, the visual images are kind of up to you. Many of you love being artists. When you love drawing things and doing things on using your hands, and that's fine. If you're that type of artist, do it. Me, I'm not an artist. So I already know, for me, I would download the images, and cut and paste them and place them where I wanted to, you know, and that would be my artistic sort of license for it. So I'm not going to hold you. It's not going to improve your grade one way or the other, unless you're like me, unless your artistic talents are so poor that you couldn't tell the difference between a grasshopper and a dinosaur. Because it wouldn't be instructional when you're looking at it. If you're that bad of an artist like me, I recommend the downloading the stuff and cutting the pasting, and be, the artistic license that way. And I've had people that have put little animations on stuff, and it was actually pretty cool. So you're free to make these timelines as fun as you want. Okay, I don't want to constrain you. But I also do want to explain here what you should have in it to get a really good grade. All right. So right below this video, and look at the caption, it says geological timescale. It says brief. And it says, note, this is not an example of a timeline project, right? It's far too simplistic to get a good grade on. It is. This is just something I lifted from the web because it shows a generalized sort of geological timescale and sort of a generalized things that are happening in life on it, but it really doesn't explain anything about what's happening on Earth, the mineralogy, and it's far too diffuse. It isn't refined enough for what we need. Well, what we have to do is figure out how refined do we need to be. So let's look down at the next geological timescale, right? That's the one that's more vertical, the long one right below it, okay? This is a full geological timescale, okay? Now, the thing about it is, I don't want you to create, your sheet of paper or whatever you're doing with that many tick marks of time, right? That's just way too detailed. So we got to figure out how to strike sort of a medium. Here, if you're going to represent time just by the era, notice the geological timescale is built from left to right. Everything on the left are really long periods of time. Those long periods of time can be broken down into smaller periods of time. Well, the next smaller divisions are called eras. And then the eras can be broken down to periods. And the periods can be broken down into epochs, right? I would suggest, and what we should do is break things down to the period level. So we want to show on the top of our timeline where we're doing the eras which you're in, and then sort of section things off by periods. Because very important things are going to be happening within the periods of those epochs. But if we get it down to in the periods of those eras, but if we get it down to the epoch level, this is far too much information, and it really obscures the view of what you're trying to actually produce, and it would make things so small. It would be too much of a burden, so we don't want to do that. So what do I mean by this, how it represents visually? Well, let's have a look at the examples. Okay. Now, I just put two examples down. Now, one of them is a digital one, and it's a PDF. That's why I can't show it here. So it says Student Digital Timeline Example PDF. If you click on that, it'll show you what the PDF of that looks like. Now, that project that student did is worth a B. It's telling you that's an average project of the class, right? So now you know what to do if you want to get sort of a B level's worth of work. Now, if you want to get an A level's worth of work, and this is where we should be looking, I always wanted you guys to reach as high as you can. Let's look at this example, the one that I have the two pictures on. That's just someone who did on butcher paper. And this is actually really good. I mean, that would be like over the top A+. Okay? And what they've done here, so let's start with the top photograph. You can see all the way at the beginning of the Earth here, the Precambrian below it. What they've done, the student has put the formation of the solar system. All of a sudden, you look down the very first column, you can see the Earth is getting hit by Theia. And now we're in Robert Haydens' Black Earth, and she actually has it. This is a female student who did this. She's really good. She has it listed as Black Earth, right? But she also shows that in the Precambrian when it happened, framed by years. And the next, we're getting into Blue Earth, then Gray Earth, sort of things that are happening there, showing them how, Haydens' sort of color representation and what's happening, showing it visually, and also putting a little text information, right, for the viewer to sort of read to follow what's going on. And she's moving through Haydens' color cycles as well as utilizing the geological timescale. And she uses nothing but eras, which are on the top, Precambrian, Paleozoic, and Mesozoic, Cenozoic. And then she uses nothing but, the periods, not the epochs. You're not going to see any epochs there because that would be too fine a division. So this is a great example. Now, where she started out with, and what you should do is not have any of the things to fill in yet, but just sort of divide the major chart out. I would do, all the eras on the top line. Get that sort of truncated out when the year marks are, so you can have those evenly spaced out on your document, right? And maybe some of the ticks to where the period should be at, right? And then as you start moving from, the old stuff from the left to the right, you can start drawing the lines as you're filling that full of information, like she's done. Sometimes she needs a little bit bigger wedge or a little bit lesser wedge because more stuff is happening in certain periods of time. So obviously she's got something there in the pre-Cambrian, which is the boring billion. And the boring billion is just a little slimy, a tiny wedge here because that's what it was. Not much happened during the boring building. So she sort of used that creatively to sort of adjust the amount of area which she's going to need. And of course, this student put her own little pictures in. Thank goodness that she could actually draw a little bit because that's an intelligent level of drawing. But she could have equally have done that by downloading images, printing them out and cutting them and gluing them on there. It would have been just as nice. So you guys don't get freaked out when you see someone who's an artist, because the world of the web lets us all be creative in that same way. All right. And the second picture is just a continuation on. Now, here's the thing is that I had students that just like, I want to get this project done right off the bat within the next week. No, because as the course unfolds, you're going to be getting information to place on this geological timeline. What are the relevant information? And that's my job, is to present that for you. And then you can pick the relevant stuff. You're sort of showing our path up to the arrival of humans, right? The transition between water, the land and the life in the water, to the land on earth, to the reptiles, to the tetrapods, finally to the origin of mammals, the transition from mammals from the Mesozoic into the Cenozoic. Mammals radiate out into primates, and primates developing and becoming humans. So we're going to be following this sort of rift as I supply information to you. So on this one, the thing is that when I look at timelines, they're usually all very different. And while there should be some few basic species in there that everybody will have, some of the core ones, which we'll be discussing, you're free to sort of look, other forms of life that are interesting to you to place on your timeline too. Like in the Mesozoic here in the picture down, someone is looking in the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, and they're sort of putting their own, dinosaurs in which they liked on there, which are sort of interesting varieties, right? So you can place different sort of species that you find really sort of interesting yourself. And I'll always point out which ones are the core ones, which you should have on it. All right. Now, to further help us on this, what we need to do is we need to get past where Hayden is in the book right now. So you need to be reading Haydens up to about page 180, up to Red Earth. So try to, before we get into section 2, before you really start working on the genetic stuff next, let's try to get our timelines completed up to Red Earth, right? So build the skeleton, and then let's start filling everything up into just about Red Earth. Now, to help you with that, what I've got here is a video. And this is a guest professor lecture video. It's by Lizzie Sambuleri. She's awesome. So she's produced about an hour-long lecture on the Precambrian and Snowball Earth. And so you're going to get to look at what the Precambrian was like as well as the cryogenic period. So you can take this information, talking about life and what the Earth was like, right? And do little annotations, and apply that and place those in your chart. Now, additionally, I've got a little reference article by Lisa Uri down here called The Origin and Evolution of Vertebrates. So when it says reference, that means don't read it. You're not going to read the whole thing. What you're going to be looking for is looking at relatively good examples and small pieces of text that will describe, the first vertebrates and which ones are making the transition sort of towards us in the different sort of, different avenues of life. So, you can look on our chart here and realize that vertebrates are starting to sort of, emerge, early on, in the late Precambrian. And you can place some of those early vertebrate species in there and sort of start building up your own story. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing through the course. I'm going to be supplying sessions like this with new information so you can keep building your chart, and we'll keep moving on and marching out through the Cenozoic. And just about the time you finish that will be just about the time to turn this in. All right. So again, I think I've mentioned it before, turning in this chart is very simple. I'll have a link on module 4 at the end, and you can just upload it directly to me. If there's any issues with that, you can always email it to me, or we'll work it out. We'll get it one way or the other. We'll get it through the cloud to me. Okay. All right. So let's get working on getting that outline done. The basic sort of format that you want to use. Getting this video lecture watched. Hunting through the reference book, The Origin and Evolution of Vertebrates, to figure out the relative examples that you want of the vertebrates that are emerging and when they're emerging. so you can figure out how you're going to place them on the timeline. And let's get through the story of Earth up into page 180, and then we'll move ourselves into section 2, which is looking at the molecular and genetic stuff. And we can take a little break from this. That's what I'm trying to do, is like, we'll work on this hard for a while, then we'll switch gears for a little while, let this rest, and then we'll come back and we'll work on the timeline at a slightly later date. Okay, all right, again, any questions? Shout out to me.